So we have a special treat. We have Bob Stein is up next and is going to talk about what he's been doing in emulation as a service. So Bob, the floor is yours.
Um, is my screen now being shared?
I see it.
Good.
Looks good.
All right. There we go. So this is going to be a rather different presentation. It's going to be sort of, the context is going to be my archive that I sent to Stanford last October, a couple hundred boxes. And it's sort of a chronological look through this archive, and the issues of emulation are going to come up in order, as in effect. I want to, by the way, mention that Colin Holgate and Michael Cohen, who are on this call, were two of my colleagues at Voyager for many years. And when I use the word I in this presentation, it often means many of us, because a lot of this work, all of this work pretty much was collaborative. I grew up in the 60s, and I mean, I grew up in the 60s, was born in the 40s, and really got my sort of start in life being politicized at university, where I was a charter member of SDS, the Students for Democratic Society, and several of the boxes that I sent to Stanford have posters and leaflets and newspapers that I collected during my years as a political activist. I had the opportunity to go to China during the, let me see if I can make this smaller. Where's my cursor? Come on, you can do it. Maybe not. Why can't I get my cursor over there? Anyway, I had an opportunity to go to China during the Cultural Revolution. So there are posters, there are books, leaflets from China. And what is wrong? Lost I understand that we don't need to emulate those things, but what I'm going to try to do with this collection is to create a narrative, and that narrative mixes and matches media types. And so and everything is sort of related. Many of us who started off with new media in the late 70s, early 80s, we were all inspired by a lot of the political struggles that were going on all over the world. And so everything really is related. After I sort of stopped doing political work sort of abruptly in about 1980, and had the good fortune to hang out with Encyclopedia Britannica for a year, and then the research group at Atari. And the thing on the left is a paper I wrote for Britannica, and on the right, memos between me and Alan Kay when he was at Atari. And this is from a series of drawings that I've given to Stanford, showing that we did these in 1981, showing how we thought the Encyclopedia of the Future would be used. That's an architect in Japan studying Japanese architecture, while a teacher in Tokyo is teaching her class about Western architecture. Shortly thereafter, I started something called the Criterion Collection, and this is an interesting emulation problem. One of the things we did with Criterion was we started doing commentary tracks on films, so that with a Laserdisc, you could play the film track but then you could switch to a commentary track.
And eat bananas all day and belch, so it didn't work. So what he did was he went down to the San Diego Zoo and he recorded the lion cage at feeding time. He reversed it, dropped it an octave, and that became Kong's roar.
So we're going to need to find a way to emulate a Laserdisc, because we do want people to have that opportunity to access the commentary tracks in the context of a film. And there are a lot of laser discs, not just feature films, that involve needing to switch between tracks. So small emulation, but it's going to be important. After the Criterion Collection, we start. This is a screenshot from what became sort of the world's first viable commercial CD-ROM. It was everything you wanted to know about Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. I can't show it in the emulator today because these CD-ROMs had dual sessions. They had a audio component, basically a CD, and a data component. And we've yet to figure out how to upload both into the emulator at the same time and to run the CD. In 1991, Apple gave us a prototype of the first Mac PowerBook. A friend of mine who was visiting from the National Library of Austria grabbed it out of my hands, put the first 10 pages of Paul Bowles' Sheltering Sky into a HyperCard stack. We looked at it together and went, oh, we could actually do electronic books now. So a couple of months later, at the beginning of 1992, this is something Colin worked on extensively. We released the first expanded books from Voyager. And so this is 1992. This is 15 years before the Kindle. Again, we can't show you this in the emulator yet because we have not been able to get our hands on a floppy disk that we could upload during the stay-at-home period. But this was pretty advanced in 1992. You could write notes in the margin. You could click on words and get a list of all the occurrences of that word in context with words on either side. You could dog-ear pages. You could put paper clips on pages. You could mark passages with a black line in the margin. They were pretty fabulous in lots of ways, except, of course, it was way too early for anything like this. So we went on from there when in December of 1991, Apple released the first version of QuickTime, and we had the rights to A Hard Day's Night, and so we decided to publish that, and it was the very first feature film released on a CD-ROM using QuickTime. Let me see if I can get this actually running in the emulator. Let's see. I'm sorry, the emulator is somewhat wonky sometimes with video.
I got every reason on earth to be mad.
We could change the size. Oh, this is painful. I'm gonna switch to a.
Get my way.
You could access the film in lots of different ways. For example, you could go scene by scene. Here's looking for Paul's grandfather. I realize what's wrong here is that I think it's the sharing of the screen is slowing down the video terribly. And you could also search by, you know what? This is silly. Let me do it differently. No, none of this is going to work. Hold on. Share screen.
Apple released QuickTime in December of 1991. And shortly in the new year of 1992, we published A Hard Day's Night, the first feature film published on CD-ROM. The whole film is here. And you can watch it in the QuickTime postage stamp size, or you could double it. You could look at this film by scene. For example, we can go to Looking for Paul's Grandfather.
He's been gone a long time. Who? Paul's grandfather.
But we could also look for it with the script. Let's go Looking for Paul's Grandfather, and it'll continue from where we were.
Oh, just where'd he go? Oh, we'll give him a couple of minutes then.
And the page will turn with the movie. And you could actually search for songs, for cast, for scenes. Any way you want to sort of move around the film, you can do that. There's also a supplementary section with things like this early film by the director, Richard Lester.
Remember me? Yeah. Let's try the next floor down.
And at the end, there was a photo gallery. You could page through these. So this was the way we presented a film circa, on a CD-ROM anyway, digitally, in 1991.
And I'm not even going to try to do it in the emulator for this next one.
In 1993, we decided we wanted to try to do more with the electronic book concept. And we had this idea that with really difficult books, if we could have the author inside the book explaining her ideas, that it would really help people understand them. And a perfect example is what we did with Marvin Minsky's Society of Mind. Marvin was one of the founders of artificial intelligence, and he wrote in a Society of Mind as an attempt to present his ideas in a popular mode. Realistically, the book was still quite difficult, so we thought we'd present the book with Marvin trying to explain some of the concepts directly. So the entire book is here. And what we did was, that was really different and had never been done before, was we shot Marvin on a green screen so that he could actually appear not in a window in the book, but actually literally on the page.
They'll say, well, I'm me. What's that? Well, if they've studied a philosophy course, maybe they'll say, well, I have a body and a mind. And I say, well, we know all about bodies, and the human body isn't very different from a guinea pig body anyway, so nothing so great about that.
So my favorite example of this, though, occurs in a different chapter, the chapter on reasoning, the section on mathematics made hard, and here, Marvin talks about the problem of math
I think the problem with children learning mathematics in this culture is that we have a very strange attitude toward it. We don't have any mathematical words. If you look at any other subject in school, maybe the child learns a dozen words every day in history or language or social studies or whatever, geography, you know. By the time the child is through 12 years of school, they probably know a couple of thousand words in each subject, all the people involved in it and all the objects and so forth. In mathematics, the children don't even know the adjective for which situation you use addition. They learn addition, subtraction, and junk like that.
Interestingly, when we did this in 1993, we assumed that in the future, this would be common, that all books would have the author, when it was appropriate at least, on the page talking directly to the reader. It's an interesting question about how come it hasn't happened.
So let me just really quickly, a couple more things. So one of the things when this sort of stuff got out from Voyager, people all over the world started sending us things, particularly artists. So that this archive that Stanford now has literally hundreds and hundreds of original work by artists that really will never be seen unless we sort of get it up in an emulator. And there's, I know from having lived with this stuff over the years, there's a remarkable repository of interesting work here. To finish, I just want to show you two things that came later. What you're going to see here is what's interesting about what I'm going to show you is not the thing itself, but how it was made. This was made in a tool that we made in late 1999 called TK3, and it's an electronic book that I put together in just a couple of hours. And it's I always started with as we may think whenever we got a new tool, and it mentions in the preface to the article in Scientific American the Emerson's American Scholars Speech. So I included the entire American Scholars Speech. You can click on Babbage to go to his Wikipedia article. One of my favorite things in here, though, was the voter gets, we've all heard about the voter. So I found a schematic diagram of it and included it. And also,
will you please make the voter safe for our Eastern listeners? Good evening, radio audience.
That's not a simulation of the voter from 1939. That is the voter in 1939. And then lastly, I want to show something else. The Beethoven that I showed earlier, the Beethoven took a really fantastic programmer almost a year to program in HyperCard. It was a very complicated piece of work back then. This was a Mellon-funded project also called Sophie, where we tried to develop a authoring environment so that people who were sort of subject experts but not programmers could assemble something. So this program on Mozart is something that, again, I put it together, and I pretty much failed physics for poets, but I put this together in an afternoon. And I'll just show you the parts of it very quickly. That's not good. Oh, what a shame. Let me cancel this. Give me one more minute, Michael. See if I can make this work.
No problem. Why Bob is working on that. We've actually given, as you can see, Bob access to our instance, our Stanford node here. And it's really been critical, as you can see, because there's lots of things that work great and things that don't. but more importantly, just the level of knowledge of some of these space environments has been really critical to helping us to get it to run. So thanks, Bob, for being patient with us and playing with our imperfect car that's being built.
Okay, thank you for being, let me see, desktop. Let's see, where's the desktop? Mozart. Second, is it going to open or not? It may not. What a shame. Because what's amazing here, and I wish that I was able to show it to you, is that what we were working towards was really sort of the original promise of HyperCard, which would let anybody start to assemble sophisticated interactive media documents. Oh well. I think I'm going to turn it back to you, Michael. I should have made a video version of this one too.
Oh, no worries, Bob. There's a lot to chew on here. So does anybody, we've got a few minutes for questions. Does anybody have any questions about what Bob has been showing us?
Hi. Yeah. Maybe it's not a question about what Bob has showed us, but it reminded me of, when you were showing the laser disc, and also, this is Hanson, by the way, and also the Beethoven, the CD-ROM with the audio track, reminded me that, at Computer History Museum, we have some Laserdisc titles that are paired with HyperCard stacks on the Mac. And we had a researcher who wanted to access these. And we actually had to set up an old Mac and a physical Laserdisc player to connect it to. And I was wondering if it doesn't look like there's any way in the system to emulate that kind of interaction between two completely different pieces of hardware.
Yeah, I mean, I think there isn't now. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I showed this, was because I think that although I gave 3 Laserdisc players to Stanford, that's just a hardware combination that just doesn't exist anymore. So we're going to have to simulate these, I think, by digitizing the Laserdiscs and doing some, behind the scenes programming to emulate.
Yeah. Actually, at the time I was working with Andrew, who was with us, and he mentioned that these Laserdiscs are actually analog. So how do you digitize a Laserdisc was actually a pretty open question. We were wondering.
Shall I say something, Bob, about that?
Of course, Colin.
That'd be great.
All right, so just exactly on that question, A Hard Day's Night, the one you saw a little while ago, we actually did digitize from a Laserdisc. We did it a frame grab at a time, and the big problem you got hardware-wise is they use serial ports that don't exist anymore. On the audio CDs like Beethoven's, one of the ideas to work around that is to digitize the audio and change all of the CD audio controlling software to access a WAV file, let's say. We've done that in other products. Same thing would apply with the Laserdisc. We would digitize the video into a MP4 and then change the software to address it as an MP4 instead of being a serial device.
Okay. Can you get the same kind of, like with a Laserdisc, you could freeze on a single frame. And I thought that on MP4 files, because of the compression, you can't necessarily freeze on any individual frame with the same kind of resolution that you could with the original Laserdisc. Is that correct?
Some of that's true. It may depend on whether you're talking about playing it with QuickTime or playing it with some other generic MP4 player. A lot of video players in general might only be able to go to the nearest keyframe. Mm-hmm. Something like QuickTime is a good enough technology that it could take you to any frame, and we were using QuickTime. So with A Hard Day's Night, we could stop or start at any point.
Cool, thank you.
We have time for another question if somebody has something they want to talk about what we've seen.
I think I've got it working, Michael. I'm going to share my screen again, if that's okay.
Shoot, Bob. Go for it.
Share screen. Share screen. Share. Okay, there we go. So
I'm Robert Winter, and it's my pleasure to invite you to join me in a listening experience that the late 18th century regarded as one of its most...
So one of the really cool things we did here was we chapterized this Mozart quartet. There was a whole section which sort of contextualizes the music with glossary sections and audio sections. But the real heart of these companions or music companions were this. Where the music starts to play, and you can get a running commentary. And then Robert Winter would pop up.
The 19th century would have been more accurate is in calling this the chromatic quartet. Because in fact, it's enormously chromatic. In fact, this first page, this slow introduction, and of course, if we think about what I think the 19th century would have been more accurate is in calling it.
So what's important to understand here is that this is something that I really did put it together in an afternoon. And it's going to be very exciting to make these tools available inside of the emulator. The amount of, I have so much fantastic work that students and teachers did in these tools that will be fantastic to show off. And also to make, what I mostly want to do is inspire people who are working now to start to build tools that empower creative people in ways that really we haven't sort of gotten to yet, but really need to. Anyway, thanks for the opportunity. And I just want to say what a huge pleasure and excitement it is to be working with the team of people at Stanford in this emulation mode. And Colin, thank you so much for all of your help. I mean, we're really making fantastic progress, and it is very, very exciting. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Bob. And